I'm Captain Sienna Reed, 34 years old. The last time my parents got close to my daughter, they sent her home in a state of sheer panic. She's only 7. She walked through the door clutching a gift box wrapped in bright yellow daisy paper, holding it to her chest like it was a homemade bomb. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lower lip trembling. "Grandpa said to give this to you," Lily whispered. "He said, Mommy shouldn't overreact." I knelt down, took the box, and told her to go wash her hands. Then, I sliced the tape. What sat at the bottom of that box forced me to grab my phone and call the police immediately. But the police were just the beginning. What happens in the next 48 hours will expose every secret my parents have buried and force my brother, the golden child, to face the crimes he's ignored for 30 years. Welcome back to Noble Revenge. If you've ever been labeled dramatic for trying to keep your child safe, leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. Now, let me tell you how this trap was set. The kitchen was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet you get on a Sunday morning, but the heavy, pressurized silence that sits in the air right before an ambush. Lily's footsteps faded as she headed toward the bathroom, leaving me alone with that daisy-covered box on the granite island. The bright yellow paper felt like a slap in the face. It was loud, obnoxious. It was Diane's favorite trick. Wrap the poison in something pretty so that if you scream when you get bitten, you're the one who looks crazy. Don't overreact. My father's voice, filtered through a 7-year-old's innocence, echoed in my head. It was a tactical muzzle. A preemptive strike against my right to be angry. I pulled my tactical folder from my pocket. The blade flicked out with a metallic click that felt more honest than anything my parents had said to me in a decade. I sliced through the tape. The paper groaned as I peeled it back, revealing a plain cardboard box. The smell hit me first. Musty. Stale. The scent of an attic that hadn't seen fresh air since the 90s. I reached inside and pulled out a handful of shredded packing paper. Underneath sat a stack of Polaroids. I went through them, one by one. Lily's 3rd birthday. My promotion ceremony. A shot of us at the park last summer. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. In every single photo, my face was gone. Diane hadn't ripped them. That would have been too impulsive for her. She had used her embroidery scissors, the ones with the gold handles she kept by her recliner. She had surgically cut around my jawline, my ears, and the crown of my head. She'd removed me from the frame with the precision of a butcher. In one photo, Lily was holding my hand, but her fingers were curled around a jagged, empty hole in the paper. It wasn't just a gift, it was an erasure. A message sent through my daughter. You don't exist in this family anymore. I set the photos down, my fingers cold. My jaw was locked so tight it ached, a familiar tension I'd carried since I was 6 years old. At the very bottom of the box was a canary yellow post-it note. Diane's handwriting was perfect, elegant, slanted cursive that she'd practiced until it looked like a font. You chose to abandon this family, Sienna. We are simply making it official, it read. I felt the pulse in my temple begin to throb. The gaslighting was breathtaking. She was holding the knife, but she was crying about the blood on her shoes. I looked at the box again. There was one more thing inside. Button, I whispered. I reached in and pulled out the old battered teddy bear. I'd had him since I was a toddler. He'd lived through my OCS training, sat in the corner of my barracks in Georgia, and even made it through a tour in Iraq. He was supposed to be a symbol of home. Diane had insisted on cleaning him up for Lily last month. I shifted the bear in my hands. He felt wrong. The weight was off. There was a hard, rectangular lump sitting right in the center of his gut. My heart rate spiked, shifting into a rhythm I hadn't felt since I was sweeping for IEDs outside of Fallujah. I flipped Button over. The original factory stitching was gone. In its place was a jagged, ugly line of heavy black nylon thread. It was a hack job. I didn't hesitate. I drove the tip of my knife into the seam and ripped. White polyester stuffing spilled out onto the counter like guts. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against cold plastic. I pulled it out. A tile tracker. Small, white, and unassuming. The The red LED on the corner pulsed once every 3 seconds. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Diane hadn't just sent a message, she had turned my daughter into a mobile broadcasting station. Every time Matt and I took her to the park, every time we visited a friend, every time we pulled into our own driveway, Diane was watching the little red dot on her phone. She was inside my perimeter. She was in my house. I stared at the tracker. The overreacting label made sense now. They wanted me to find this and stay quiet. They wanted me to be a good daughter and ignore the fact that they were stalking my child. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My nervous system simply went cold. The captain took over. The mother retreated behind a wall of gray steel. I grabbed a Ziploc bag from the drawer and dropped the tile inside, sealing it tight. I grabbed the photos and the note, shoving them back into the box. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It picked up on the second ring. "Rachel," I said. My voice was flat, emotionless. "The perimeter has been breached." There was a pause on the other end. Rachel Torres, my former JAG assistant, didn't ask for details. She knew that tone. "How bad, Captain?" A tracker, hidden in Lily's toy, plus a written ultimatum. "Jesus," Rachel hissed. "You calling the cops?" "In a minute. First, I need you to pull the standing orders on grandparents' rights in this county." "Diane's going for a custody play. I can feel it." I looked at the shredded bear on the counter. The rot in this family didn't start today. It didn't start with a gift box. It had been festering for 30 years, hidden behind lace curtains and Sunday dinners. "Enemies aren't born, Rachel," I said, staring at the empty jawlines in the photos. "They're trained, and it's time to figure out exactly when the training began." I hung up. I looked toward the bathroom where Lily was humming a song, oblivious to the war that had just been declared in her kitchen. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Somewhere out there, Diane was looking at her screen, wondering why her red dot had stopped moving. She wanted a reaction. She was going to get a war. To understand why Diane would sew a tracking device into a 7-year-old's teddy bear, you have to understand the leash she kept me on for 30 years. It was never made of leather or chain. It was made of a single word, whispered like a secret and used like a gag: sensitive. In the Archer household, that word was a tactical strike. It was the white flag I was forced to wave before the battle even started. If Derek snatched a toy out of my hands until my knuckles turned white and I dared to make a sound, Diane would sigh and look at my father. "Sienna is just so sensitive," she would say. If I pointed out that Derek got a new car for his 16th birthday while I was told to find a job if I wanted gas money for my hand-me-down sedan, the response was the same. "You are always overreacting, Sienna. You make everything so difficult." She used that label to strip me of my right to protest. She turned my boundaries into a mental illness. By the time I was 18, I had learned that being right didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was keeping the peace, and in our house, peace meant my total surrender. The breaking point happened at the Thanksgiving table when I was 19 years old. The house smelled like rosemary, roasting turkey, and expensive red wine. The kind of warmth that looks perfect on a greeting card, but feels like a chokehold when you are the one standing in the cold. Derek had just graduated from college. He sat there in his pristine button-down shirt, the golden child basking in the glow of his own mediocre success. Right between the mashed potatoes and the gravy boat, my father pulled out his checkbook. I watched his hand move. I heard the scratch of the ballpoint pen against the paper. It was a rhythmic, surgical sound. He tore the check out and slid it across the tablecloth toward Derek. $42,000. "A down payment for your first home, son," my father said, his voice thick with a pride he never once directed at me. "A man needs a foundation." Diane started clapping. Her eyes were shining as she reached over to pat Derek's hand. "We are so proud of the responsible man you have become," she beamed. I sat there, staring at my plate. I had $300 in my savings account and a stack of community college brochures that I knew I could never afford to use. I looked at the check, then at my mother. I didn't even get a chance to open my mouth before her expression shifted. The pride vanished, replaced by that sharp, preemptive disappointment. "Don't you dare start, Sienna," she whispered. "Do not ruin this for your brother with your jealousy. You are being so sensitive." I didn't say a word. I stood up, walked to my room, and packed a single rucksack. 2 days later, I was standing in a recruitment center, signing my life over to the United States Army. I didn't do it for the glory. I did it because I needed a way out that didn't involve begging for crumbs at a table where I wasn't welcome. Diane looked at me in my uniform like I was a stain on the family carpet. She told the local pastor that I was selfish. She told everyone at her bridge club that I had abandoned the family because I couldn't handle the pressure of being a daughter. She painted me as the unstable one, the girl who chose guns over a husband and a home. But she never mentioned the wire transfers. 2 years later, I was stationed in a dust-choked base in a combat zone. I was earning hazard pay. Every month, I sat in a humid plywood phone booth, the smell of sour sweat and diesel fuel thick in the air. And I authorized a transfer of $200 to my parents' bank account. I knew they were struggling with the heating bills. I knew my father's pension was stretched thin because they kept bailing Derek out of his mounting credit card debt. So, I ate dry rations in a hole in the ground so they could keep their thermostat at 72 degrees. I sent that money every single month for 3 years. Diane never sent a text to say she received it. She never thanked me. She just took the blood money and continued to tell the neighbors that I was the cold, ungrateful child who never called home. To her, my survival was an insult. My independence was a threat to her narrative. Our family was a corrupt barracks. Derek was the high-ranking officer in the luxury quarters, pampered and protected, allowed to look the other way while the heavy lifting was done. My father was the coward who held the shield for the commander, terrified that if he stood up for me, Diane would turn her sights on him. And I was the one on the front line, the meat shield meant to soak up every erratic outburst and every psychological blow Diane felt like throwing. They needed me to be the villain. Because if I wasn't the sensitive one who made things up, then they would have to face the fact that they were predators living off the daughter they pretended to despise. If this story is hitting home for you, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can keep this mission moving forward. We are building a community here of people who refuse to be broken. And if you have ever been the black sheep who kept the family afloat while they treated you like trash, I want you to drop the word survivor in the comments right now. Let's see how many of us are standing tall. As I stood in my kitchen 30 years later, staring at the shredded teddy bear and the red light of the tracker, I realized the game had never changed. Diane had just found a new way to try and put me back in that psychological basement. But she forgot one thing. I wasn't that 19-year-old girl at the Thanksgiving table anymore. I was a captain. And I was done being sensitive. I picked up the Ziploc bag and felt the cold plastic against my skin. It was time to stop playing defense. "Matt," I said as my husband walked into the room, his face pale as he looked at the wreckage on the counter. "Pack a bag for Lily. We are leaving." "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice shaking. I looked at the tile tracker one last time before shoving it into my pocket. "To the one place they can't follow us," I replied. "Into the truth." But as we pulled out of the driveway, I saw a black sedan parked 2 houses down. Its headlights were off, but the engine was idling. A thin plume of exhaust rose into the cold night air. Diane wasn't just watching a dot on a screen, she was already here. Matt was 28 when I finally figured out that family didn't have to be a battlefield. He was a systems engineer. A man who looked at the world in terms of logic, blueprints, and transparent data. He grew up in a house that was loud, messy, and brutally honest. If someone was pissed off, they said it. Then they ate burgers in the backyard and moved on. To Matt, Diane's emotional embargo was a foreign language. When we decided on a small backyard wedding instead of the 3-ring circus my mother wanted, Diane went dark. 3 months of absolute silence, no calls, no texts, just a void where a mother was supposed to be. I spent weeks staring at my phone, waiting for a blow that never came. Matt just watched me. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell me to make it right. He just sat on the porch, a beer in his hand, looking at the sunset. Family shows up, Sienna, he said. His voice was steady, like a bass anchor. They show up, they don't make demands. If they aren't here, they aren't family. They're just people with your last name. He held my hand, and for a second the static in my head cleared. I thought I'd finally built a perimeter. I thought the war was over. I was wrong. The silence wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical reload. The peace shattered 40 minutes after Lily was born. I hadn't even called Diane. I didn't want her perfume in the room. I didn't want her judgment on the bedsheets. But 40 minutes after I'd finished pushing, the heavy oak door of the maternity ward swung open. The smell hit me first. The sharp, sterile scent of hospital-grade antiseptic was obliterated by a cloud of heavy, expensive floral perfume. It was suffocating. Then came the sound. Click, click, click. Diane's heels hitting the linoleum like a drumbeat of war. I was still hooked up to the IVs. My body was a wreckage of exhaustion and pain. Diane didn't look at me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even acknowledge Matt, who was standing by the window. She walked straight past my bed. She marched to the clear plastic bassinet where Lily lay wrapped in a striped hospital blanket. Diane reached in and scooped my daughter up before I could even draw breath to protest. There she is, Diane whispered. She held Lily close to her face, ignoring the nurses, ignoring the mother she'd ignored for months. There's my girl. She didn't say granddaughter. She didn't say Sienna's baby. She claimed her. In that bleached white hospital room, Diane wasn't there to celebrate a birth. She was there for a reclaim. Lily wasn't a person to her. She was a version 2.0. A second chance for Diane to install the software she couldn't quite force into me. The hollow feeling in my chest wasn't just exhaustion. It was a warning siren. From that day on, my boundaries didn't just get crossed, they were steamrolled. Lily has a severe peanut allergy, not a tummy ache allergy. A throat closes up in 60 seconds allergy. We carry EpiPens like ammunition. We vet every house we enter. It's a hard line, non-negotiable. Diane decided that medical science was just another way for me to be strict. I caught her in the kitchen during a Sunday visit. She was whispering to Lily, who was 6 at the time. Diane was pulling a tin of shortbread cookies out of her purse, the kind with the heavy butter glaze and crushed nuts on top. Mom said no, Grandma, Lily whispered, her eyes wide. Mommy is just being mean, Diane murmured, stroking Lily's hair. She's so serious all the time. Grandma knows what you like. Just a little bite won't hurt. We won't tell her. She was playing the savior. She was building a secret world where I was the villain and she was the only one who understood. She was teaching my daughter that my protection was actually a prison. I stepped into the kitchen, my boots heavy on the tile. Diane didn't flinch. She just tucked the cookies back into her bag with a practiced, casual grace. We were just talking, Sienna, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Don't be so sensitive. The poison wasn't in the cookies, it was in the words. The full scale of the infection didn't show itself until a month ago. We were driving home from a weekend at my parents' place. Lily was in the back seat, clutching that button bear, the one I now knew had a tile tracker hidden in its gut. The car was warm. The hum of the tires on the asphalt was supposed to be lulling. But Lily was stiff. She wasn't looking out the window at the cows or the trees. She was staring at the back of my head. Mom! Her voice was small, thin. Yeah, baby. Why do you always make Grandma cry? The air in the car turned to ice. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, her little fingers twisting the fur on the bear's arm. Grandma says you're always mad at her, Lily continued. She says you don't love her as much as she loves us. Why are you always so mean to her? I slammed on the brakes. The car lurched. The tires screeched against the pavement, a violent, guttural sound that echoed through the empty country road. I pulled onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching like bone under the wheels. My hands were white on the steering wheel. I could feel the leather biting into my palms. My heart wasn't just beating, it was thudding against my ribs like a trapped animal. I looked back at Lily. She looked terrified. Not of me, but of the monster Diane had spent 7 years drawing in her head. Diane wasn't just stalking us. She wasn't just watching a red dot on a screen. She was sitting in my back seat. She was standing in my kitchen. She was inside the mind of the only person I had left to protect. The perimeter hadn't just been breached. The enemy had turned my own child into a weapon. I put the car in gear, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I just drove. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw it. A single, yellow daisy-wrapped box sitting on the front porch, waiting for us. Thanksgiving, the holiday of gratitude. In the Archer house, it was the holiday of endurance. The air in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. A suffocating mix of roasting turkey, expensive red wine, and the dry, artificial heat of the oversized fireplace. 12 of us sat around the heavy oak table. Silverware clattered against porcelain, a sharp rhythmic sound like a firing squad loading their rifles in unison. By 7:30 p.m., Lily was done. Her eyelids were lead. She was 7 years old and had been forced to sit through 4 hours of Diane's carefully choreographed family bonding. I saw her rub her eyes, her small shoulders slumped under the weight of the performance. I didn't ask for permission. I gave a command. Lily, upstairs, bedtime. The clattering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. I felt the air pressure shift. Diane didn't look at Lily. She looked at me. Her wine glass hit the table with a heavy clack. Red wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white linen like a fresh, bleeding wound. Her eyes narrowed, the pupils becoming sharp pinpricks of light. "It's Thanksgiving, Sienna," she said. Her voice was low, coated in a sugary poison. "Who dies from staying up one night?" "I only wanted a holiday with my granddaughter. Is that too much to ask from you?" I didn't blink. I kept my spine straight against the high-backed chair. "She's exhausted, Diane. She's going to bed." Then came the performance. It was surgical. A deep red flush crept up Diane's neck, blooming like an allergic reaction. Her eyes glazed over with practiced precision. One tear escaped, then another. They fell with the timing of a professional mourner. "You always ruin everything," she sobbed into her silk napkin. "Every single time I try to bring this family together, you find a way to tear it apart." I looked around the table, observing the mobbing in real time. 11 people, 11 witnesses. Not one of them looked at the woman crying for no reason. They looked at me. They looked at me with a collective, burning resentment because I was the one who had ruined the mood. I was the one who hadn't played the part of the submissive daughter. My father, Richard, was focused entirely on his plate. He moved a pile of mashed potatoes from one side to the other, his fork scraping the ceramic. He was 64 years of spinelessness wrapped in an expensive cashmere sweater. He wouldn't look up. He never did when Diane was on the warpath. Derek, the golden child, threw his napkin down. It hit the table like a white flag of surrender to Diane's insanity. He glared at me, his face twisted in a sneer that mirrored our mother's perfectly. "Jesus, Sienna," he snapped, his voice sharp with irritation. "Why do you always have to be the center of attention? Just sit down and let her have her night. You're being a brat." Aunt Patricia leaned away from me, her body language screaming that my defiance was contagious. Not one person spoke up. No one mentioned that Lily was literally falling asleep in her chair. No one mentioned that Diane was throwing a tantrum simply because she had lost control of the schedule for 5 minutes. In the desert, I had stood in the path of fire for the people in my unit. I had bled for soldiers who were strangers 6 months prior. But here, at this table, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA, I was completely alone. I was the sacrificial lamb meant to be slaughtered so they could finish their pumpkin pie in peace. My father finally cleared his throat, a deep, gravelly sound that usually meant he was about to deliver a verdict. "Sienna," he said, his voice flat and authoritative, "show some respect for your mother. Sit back down." That was the limit. The final perimeter had been breached. "We're leaving," I said. I stood up. The legs of my chair groaned against the hardwood floor, a long, agonizing shriek that cut through Diane's sobbing. I didn't look at the tears. I didn't look at the scowls. I looked at Matt. Matt didn't hesitate. He was my only ally in this sea of cowards. He stood up and swung Lily onto his shoulders in one fluid motion. She was already half asleep, her head dropping onto his neck. I grabbed my purse and my coat. Diane's sobbing stopped instantly. It was replaced by a shrill, piercing scream that echoed in the hallway. "Fine, go, just like always," she shrieked. "You always steal everything from me. You take my son, you take my granddaughter, you take my life." We walked toward the door, leaving behind a room full of people who valued a fake peace over the safety of a child. The door slammed behind us, a heavy final thud that felt like a liberation. But a narcissist never lets the prey escape that easily. The next morning, I sent a single text to the family group chat vowing to protect our boundaries. The response was a 5-day blackout, a tactical silence meant to make me crawl back and apologize. When I didn't, the war went public. On day 6, Diane launched the Flying Monkeys. She posted a photo of Lily on Facebook, a picture of them together from 2 years ago. Lily looked happy, Diane looked like a saint. The caption read, "Praying for the children who are kept from the hearts that love them. Family is a gift, even when some choose to throw it away. Pray for my daughter, she's lost her way." The comments flooded in from neighbors and church members. "So sorry, Diane. God sees your heart." Then, at 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. A name popped up that made my stomach turn. Pastor Jim Hollis. He was the peacekeeper Diane had manipulated for years. I picked up the phone. I didn't say hello, I just waited. "Sienna." The pastor's voice was warm, practiced, and utterly hollow. "I've been talking to your mother. She's in a lot of pain. Don't you think it's time we talked about forgiveness?" I looked at the bedroom door where Lily was safe. "Forgiveness, Pastor?" I whispered. "Or surrender?" 3 hours. That is how long the tile tracker sat on my kitchen island after I ripped it out of Lily's bear. It sat in a Ziploc bag, its red LED pulsing like the heartbeat of a snitch. Matt was pacing the linoleum, his boots echoing the frantic rhythm of his breathing. I didn't pace. I sat at the table, back straight, eyes locked on the front door. My military training had stripped away the urge to fidget. In a combat zone, you don't move until you have a target. The doorbell rang at 11:14 p.m. It wasn't the police. It was a sharp, insistent sound that cut through the hum of the refrigerator. Matt reached for the door handle, his knuckles white, but I raised a hand. I checked the monitor. It was Derek. The golden child looked like a man who had just crawled out of a car wreck. His expensive button-down was wrinkled. His hair, usually gelled into a corporate-approved helmet, was a mess. Sweat beaded on his upper lip, glistening under the porch light. When I opened the door, he didn't say hello. He didn't ask to come in. He walked straight to the kitchen island, saw the tracker in the bag, and nearly collapsed. "She actually did it," he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. Matt stepped in, his chest puffed out, ready to throw my brother back into the night. I put my arm out. My tactical instincts told me Derek wasn't here to play messenger for Diane. He was carrying something. A man doesn't look that broken unless he's carrying the weight of a guilty conscience. Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder. It was stained with coffee and worn at the edges. He slammed it onto the table. The sound was heavy. "Final." "Everything is in there," Derek said. "The emails, the lawyer's notes, the draft for the custody suit." I opened the folder. My hands were steady, even as the first page burned my eyes. It was a list of evidence typed out in Diane's perfect slanted font. She had been building a case to take Lily away from us for months. Sienna is frequently absent due to deployments. Sienna exhibits signs of psychological instability stemming from her military environment. Sienna's rigid discipline is a form of emotional abuse. I stared at the words. She was using my service, the medals I'd bled for, the years I'd spent in the dirt, as a weapon to prove I was unfit to be a mother. She had turned my pride into a cage. I flipped to the last page. This was the indictment. It was a draft for a false affidavit. Diane wanted Derek to sign it. She wanted him to swear under oath that he had witnessed me physically and mentally terrorizing my daughter. I almost signed it, Derek confessed. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stared at his trembling hands. I've spent 30 years telling myself that Mom is just passionate. I've been brainwashed into thinking she's always right. I kept reading. Underneath the legal documents was a copy of a small notebook. It was a scouting report. Diane had spent 7 months logging every hour Lily was picked up from school, every late night Matt worked at the office, every time I left the house for a drill weekend. She had been running a surveillance operation on her own daughter. Why now, Derek? I asked. My voice was a cold blade. Why did you finally grow a spine? Derek didn't answer with words. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and threw it on top of the folder. It was an ultrasound photo, 8 weeks old. Sarah is pregnant, he said, his voice cracking. And I realize that if I let Mom do this to you, she's going to do it to my kid too. I saw her face when she talked about saving Lily. It wasn't love, it was hunger. He leaned against the counter, looking like he was going to vomit. Then he told me the one thing I hadn't expected. A secret Diane had buried under decades of lace curtains and Sunday dinners. Grandmother disowned Mom when she was 20, Derek whispered. She did the same thing back then. The manipulation, the stalking. Mom was the victim once. I felt a flash of something, not pity, but a cold realization. Diane wasn't just a monster. She was a product of a factory that had been running for generations. But I didn't care about her trauma. Trauma is an explanation, not a license to kill. It stops here, I said. I gathered the 6 pieces of physical evidence, the tile tracker, the photos with the cutout faces, the yellow post-it note, the scouting notebook, the emails, the draft affidavit. I put them all back into the brown folder. I didn't offer Derek a drink. I didn't offer him a place to sleep. He had been a bystander for 30 years while I was being shredded, and one night of honesty wasn't going to fix that. You did the right thing, I said, walking him to the door. But don't expect a thank you. You just paid a debt that's 30 years overdue. I shut the door and locked it. I looked at Matt. He was standing by the kitchen island, staring at the ultrasound photo Derek had left behind. What now? Matt asked. I grabbed my phone and dialed Rachel again. I looked at the brown folder, my mind already calculating the blast radius. Diane thought she was the only one who knew how to run a campaign. She thought she was the only one who could mobilize an army. Rachel, I said when she picked up, I have the intel. All of it. Tell the lawyer we aren't filing for a restraining order anymore. Then what are we doing, Captain? I looked at the red light on the tile tracker, pulsing one last time before I cut the power. We're going to trial, I said, and I'm going to make sure that for the rest of her life, the only person Diane Archer gets to manipulate is her cellmate. I hung up and started marking the calendar. The war was no longer in my kitchen. It was moving to the courthouse. 4:12 p.m. The sun was still high over the suburbs, but the world in my living room went cold the second the process server knocked on the door. He didn't say much, just handed over the papers and walked back to his beat-up sedan. The temporary restraining order was officially served. The legal fence was up. And as I expected, Diane responded by trying to burn the whole forest down. The acoustic terrorism started 3 minutes later. My phone didn't just ring, it shrieked. It buzzed against the marble countertop with a violent, mechanical persistence. I didn't pick up. I sat there, back straight as a rebar, hands folded over my knees, and watched the screen light up over and over. First, it was my father. He didn't leave a message of concern. He left a grenade. His voice on the machine was thick with that shaky, performative grief Diane had perfected over 40 years. Your mother is sobbing on the kitchen floor, Sienna. Richard's voice cracked. She can't breathe. She can't eat. Is this what you wanted? Are you happy now? I didn't flinch. I watched the dust motes dancing in a sliver of afternoon light. Then the digital smear campaign went live. Diane didn't wait for a court date to play judge. She went straight to Facebook. She posted a grainy photo of her wedding day, the one where she looked like a saint in white lace. The caption was a masterclass in narcissistic martyrdom. When your own flesh and blood treats you like a criminal for the crime of loving too much, God sees the heart. Pray for my daughter. She has truly lost her way. The scorched earth policy had begun. She was burning my reputation to heat her own house. By the next morning, the flying monkeys were in full flight. These were the puppets Diane had spent years grooming with her pies and her soft-spoken lies. Pastor Jim Hollis didn't call me. He cornered Matt in the parking lot of his office. He stood by Matt's truck, leaning in with that hollow, pastoral smile, talking about reconciliation and honoring thy mother. Matt just climbed into his cab and shut the door. He's a good man. He didn't argue. He just drove away while the pastor stood there, looking like a man who had missed his bus. Then came Aunt Patricia. She didn't call either. She jammed, she shoved an anonymous letter through the mail slot. No return address. Just a single sheet of lined paper that smelled faintly of mothballs and cheap peppermint. "How do you sleep at night?" it asked in shaky, jagged handwriting. I didn't throw it away. I put it in the Ziploc bag with the tile tracker. Evidence. Every piece of hate was just another brick in the wall I was building. But Diane wasn't satisfied with the adults. She went for the perimeter. Rachel called me at noon, her voice tight with professional fury. She tried to get to Lily at the school gates, Captain. She was dropping off a sweater she claimed Lily forgot. The school security flagged her because of the TRO fax I sent this morning. She made a scene, crying, screaming that we were kidnappers. I stood in my kitchen and felt the air go thin. My jaw locked. I went to the door and replaced the deadbolt with a heavy-duty Grade 1 lock. I turned off the old landline. I pulled the shades. I built a concrete wall of silence around our lives, but I knew the poison was already leaking through the cracks. The real damage showed up on night 9. I went into Lily's room to tuck her in. The yellow nightlight cast long, soft shadows across her posters. She wasn't sleeping. She was sitting up, her small hands picking at the corner of her quilt, over and over. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light like a trapped bird. I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't say a word. I just waited. "Mom." Her voice was a thin, jagged thread. "Yeah, baby." "Am I the reason Grandma is sad?" She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. She told me I was her angel. She told me I was the only thing that made her happy. If I don't see her, am I still an angel? It was a gut punch, a rank S+ strike to the heart. Diane hadn't just stalked her. She had installed a guilt trip software in a 7-year-old's brain. She had convinced my daughter that her grandmother's happiness was her responsibility. She had turned a child into a crutch. I leaned in, my chest tight enough to snap. I took her hands in mine. "Lily, you are an angel. But some people use that word like a chain, not like wings. You aren't responsible for Grandma's tears. You are responsible for being a kid. That's it." I kissed her forehead, but I could feel the tremor in my own fingers. I walked out of that room and stood at the kitchen table, my palms flat against the cold surface, pressing down until my wrists ached. I had to stop the shaking. I had to stay sharp. If you've ever watched a manipulator turn your own child against you, you know this hollow, burning feeling. It's a war for the soul of the next generation. Hit that like button and subscribe to Noble Revenge right now. We are building a perimeter against the snakes. I want to see how many of us are done playing nice. If you've decided to stop letting people use your kindness as a chain, I want you to comment the word wings down below. Let's show them we aren't staying on the ground anymore. Rachel called me an hour later. We were going over the final prep for tomorrow. The air in the house was silent, heavy with the weight of the coming storm. "The judge is going to ask Sienna," Rachel said. Her voice was clinical, prepping me for the cross-examination. "They're going to ask why you waited 30 years to finally draw this line. Why now?" I looked at the shadow of the new deadbolt on the floor. I looked at the dark hallway leading to Lily's room. "Because I was trained, Rachel," I whispered. I was trained to believe that defending myself was a crime. I was taught that my survival was an insult to the people who were supposed to love me. I grabbed my coat and stood by the door, scanning the room one last time. Everything was in its place, square, level, controlled. But tomorrow, I said, my voice turning to cold iron. I'm going to court to clear my name, and I'm going to make sure the training ends with me. I walked out into the dark, the lock clicking home behind me. The war was officially moving to the courtroom. Monday morning, courtroom number 3. The air in the room was stale, a suffocating blend of old oak polish, cold coffee, and the sharp, metallic tang of nervous sweat. It was a space designed to intimidate, built to crush anyone who didn't have a lawyer and a lie ready to go. Diane sat at the table across the aisle. She had spent a long time on her costume. A soft floral dress, a string of fake pearls she'd probably bought at a department store to look like an heirloom. Her foundation was layered on thick, a beige mask intended to hide the 62 years of spite etched into her skin. She looked like a Hallmark card of a grandmother. Fragile, innocent, the perfect victim of an ungrateful daughter. I wore black, a structured suit with lines as sharp as a bayonet. No jewelry, no makeup. I didn't want to look like a victim. I wanted to look like a report. I sat with my spine locked, my hands resting flat on the table, thumbs tucked in. Military habit. Stay ready. Stay still. Don't give them a single twitch to feed on. Garrett, Diane's lawyer, stood up first. He was a man who smelled like expensive cigars and cheap morality. He adjusted his silk tie and turned toward Judge Walsh. Walsh was 70, with a face that looked like a piece of sun-dried leather. He'd spent 40 years hearing people lie about why they hit their wives or stole from their bosses. He looked bored. "Your Honor," Garrett began, his voice a practiced, oily baritone. "What we have here is a tragedy. My client, Diane Archer, is a devoted grandmother, a woman who has spent her life nurturing her family, but she is being treated like a common criminal by her own daughter. The petitioner, Ms. Reed, has a documented history of psychological instability, a product of her high-stress military career. She is, quite simply, overreacting to a grandmother's love. She is paranoid. She is seeing threats where there is only affection. Darvo, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender." I'd seen the manual. I knew the play. Diane wiped a corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. One tear. Perfect timing. I stood up. I didn't wait for Garrett to sit down. I didn't look at my mother. If I looked at her, I'd see the woman who used to pack my lunch. And that version of her was a ghost. This was a target. "Your Honor," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was just heavy. It carried the weight of 1,000 miles of sand and a decade of keeping my mouth shut. My father's last words to me through my daughter were to stop overreacting. He said I was making things up, that I was sensitive. Well, today I've stopped overreacting. Today I'm just presenting the after-action review. I reached into my leather briefcase. I pulled out the Ziploc bag. I didn't place it on the table. I dropped it. The plastic hit the mahogany with a sharp, hollow thwack. Inside, the tile tracker sat in its nest of white bear stuffing. The red LED pulsed. A rhythmic mechanical heartbeat. Pulse, pulse, pulse. "This was found inside my 7-year-old daughter's chest," I said. "Sutured into her teddy bear with industrial-grade nylon thread. My mother put it there. She wanted to know where my daughter slept. She wanted to know which grocery store we used. She wanted to know when we left the house so she could find the right moment to intervene." Judge Walsh leaned forward. The boredom in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp curiosity. He looked at the tracker. He looked at the blinking red light. I didn't stop. I pulled out the stack of Polaroids. I fanned them out on the table like a deck of cards. "These were sent to my home," I continued. My voice was a flat, even drone. A tactical briefing. "Photos of my daughter's life. Every single one has my face surgically removed with embroidery scissors. My mother wanted me to know that in her world, I am already dead. I am a hole in the paper." The court reporter's fingers flew over the keys. Tap, 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 tap. The only sound in the room besides Diane's sudden, shaky intake of breath. I reached for the last item. The scouting notebook. The one Diane had used to log our lives for 7 months. This is a surveillance log, I told the judge. It contains our work schedules, our daughter's school pickup times, the license plate numbers of our friends. This isn't love, Your Honor. This is a reconnaissance mission. This is a predator marking her territory. I looked at Diane. For the first time in 30 years, the power dynamic shifted. I saw it in the way her jaw dropped. I saw it in the way the beige foundation on her forehead began to crack as she sweated. She wasn't the commander anymore. She was a witness who had been caught in a lie. Garrett tried to object, his voice high and frantic. Your Honor, this is unverified. Sit down, Mr. Garrett, Walsh barked. He didn't look at the lawyer. He was staring at the notebook. He picked it up, flipping through the pages of Diane's slanted, elegant cursive. His face turned a deep, angry shade of red. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had already been triggered. Diane dug her fingers into the armrests. She gripped them so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. Her mask was gone. The devoted grandma had vanished, replaced by a cornered animal. I have one more thing, I said. I looked toward the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung open. The brass hinges groaned, a long, slow sound that seemed to last forever. Derek Archer stepped into the room. The golden child. The man who had spent his life being the shield for our mother's madness. He was wearing a suit, but his shoulders were slumped. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He didn't look at Diane. He kept his eyes on me. Diane stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Derek? She whispered. Her voice was thin, terrified. Derek didn't answer. He walked toward the witness stand, his boots clicking on the floor. I sat down. I folded my hands. I waited. The air in the room was electric, a storm ready to break. The final airstrike had just arrived. Derek Archer didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the rows of people who had spent the last week whispering about my instability. He walked to the witness stand with his head down, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying a crate of lead. The golden child had finally stepped out of the sun, and the shadows under his eyes were dark enough to be bruises. He took the oath with a voice that sounded like it had been dragged through gravel. Diane was leaning forward, her fake pearls clicking against the edge of the mahogany table. She was smiling. A small, encouraging smile meant to remind him of the 30 years of bribes and Sunday dinners she'd used to buy his soul. She expected a shield. She expected her favorite soldier to hold the line. She got a landslide instead. My mother asked me to sign an affidavit, Derek started. He looked at Judge Walsh, not at the woman in the floral dress. She wanted me to swear that I'd seen my sister, Sienna, physically and mentally abuse her daughter. She told me it was the only way to save Lily. The air in the courtroom didn't just go still, it died. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, a low mechanical growl that seemed to fill the silence. Diane's smile didn't fade. It froze. It turned into a grotesque porcelain mask. Did you sign it, Mr. Archer? Walsh asked. No. Derek's voice got louder, sharper. Because it was a lie, a total calculated fabrication. Sienna is the only person in our family who has her head on straight. She's the only one who isn't living in a house of mirrors. Walsh leaned in. And why are you coming forward now, after all this time? Derek finally turned his head. He looked at Diane, and for the first time in my life, I saw him see her. Not as a mother, not as a saint, but as a threat. My wife is 8 weeks pregnant, Derek said. His voice cracked, then hardened into steel. And I realized that if I helped my mother destroy Sienna today, I'd be teaching my own kid that loyalty means helping a monster. I'm done. The golden child is retired. The explosion happened at 10:42 a.m. Diane didn't wait for her lawyer to speak. She didn't wait for the judge. She stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor like a wounded animal. The pearls around her neck snapped as she lunged toward the witness stand. The witness stand. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You ungrateful traitor!" she shrieked. Her voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a jagged blade. "I gave you everything. I bought your house. I paid your debts. And you stand there and choose her? She's a killer. She's a freak with a gun." "Mrs. Archer, sit down." Walsh hammered the gavel. The wood-on-wood sound was like a gunshot. Bang! 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 "Lily is mine!" Diane screamed, her hands clawing at the air as if she could grab my daughter out of the atmosphere. "I am the only one who loves her. You can't take her from me. Taise Kong Hae Gyong, I will not be silenced." The devoted grandmother was gone. In her place stood a cornered predator, baring her teeth at the world. The court officers moved in, their boots heavy on the carpet, but Walsh waved them back. He wanted to see this. He wanted the record to show exactly who Diane Archer was when the cage was opened. Then Walsh turned his gaze to my father. Richard was sitting in his cashmere sweater, looking like a pile of damp laundry. He was 64 years of silence, a man who had traded his daughter's safety for a quiet life. Walsh didn't use the gavel. He used his eyes. "Mr. Archer," the judge said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You were in the house when that tracker was found. You were there when these photos were cut. What do you have to say for yourself?" Richard's surrender was pathetic. It was a whimpering, spineless collapse. He didn't look at Diane. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor. "I didn't know the details," he stammered, his voice thin and hollow. She told me it was an old toy. I just wanted peace, Your Honor. I just wanted the fighting to stop." "Peace?" Walsh spat the word out like it was rotten meat. "You traded your grandchild's privacy for a nap?" Richard looked at me then, a quick sidelong glance. "I'm sorry, Sienna," he whispered. It was the mercy shot, the final betrayal. He wasn't apologizing because he loved me. He was apologizing because he was caught. Diane looked at him and let out a sound that wasn't human, a low, guttural hiss of pure contempt. She was completely alone. Her husband had folded. Her son had defected. Her daughter was a wall of cold iron. The gavel came down one last time. "I've heard enough," Walsh said. He didn't even look at Garrett, who was sitting with his head in his hands. "The temporary restraining order is now a permanent order of protection for a period of 2 years. Diane and Richard Archer are barred from any contact with Sienna Reed, Matt Reed, or Lily Reed. Physical, digital, or through third parties." Diane's knees buckled. She sank into her chair, her face gray. "But we aren't done," Walsh continued. His voice was clinical. "Based on the evidence and the behavior displayed in this courtroom today, I am ordering a mandatory psychological evaluation for Diane Archer. The results will determine if further criminal charges for stalking and harassment are warranted." Diane's voice choked. A small strangled sob escaped her throat. The tyrant had been stripped of her army, her crown, and her lies. She was just an old woman in a floral dress, waiting for a doctor to tell her what everyone in the room already knew. I stood up. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt clean. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking a steady military rhythm on the marble. I didn't look back at the wreckage. I didn't look at my mother's tears. As I reached the heavy oak doors, Derek caught up to me. He was trembling. "Is it over?" he asked. I looked at the bright, midday sun pouring through the glass windows of the lobby. "The battle is over, Derek," I said. "But the reconstruction starts now." I walked out into the heat, the sound of the court door closing behind me with a heavy final thud. But as I reached my car, I saw a familiar yellow envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Diane was in court. Richard was in court. So who left the note? 3 weeks. 21 days of a silence so absolute it felt heavy. In the beginning, the quiet was a trap. I found myself checking the new Ring cameras every 10 minutes, waiting for a floral print dress to appear on the sidewalk or for a heavy-duty SUV to idle too long at the curb. I slept with my phone on the nightstand, but the screen stayed dark. No shriek of a ringtone, no vibrating terror at 2 a.m. The war hadn't just ended. The enemy had vanished into the smoke. The house felt different. It didn't feel like a target anymore. It felt like a home. I spent the first week scrubbing the floors with bleach and lemon oil, trying to strip the scent of Diane's perfume out of the carpets. I worked until my hands were raw and my back ached, a familiar physical grind that kept the ghosts at bay. I stood straight even when I was alone in the kitchen, a habit from the sand. I scanned the rooms, not for threats, but for clutter. Anything that carried her touch had to go. The flying monkeys had retreated back into the brush. Aunt Patricia had stopped sending her jagged little notes. Word got back through Matt's office that she was telling people Diane was taking a break for her health. A tactical retreat. The neighborhood gossip mill had moved on to a local zoning dispute. We were no longer the lead story. Richard's letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. His handwriting was shaky, the loops of his letters trailing off as if he'd lost his breath mid-sentence. He was in treatment, he said. He was seeing a shrink. I should have done this 40 years ago, he wrote. I'm sorry, Sienna. I'm so sorry. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the surge of forgiveness he was probably fishing for. I just felt a cold, hollow space where a father should have been. It was too little, and it was decades late. I folded the paper into a precise, sharp-edged square and dropped it into the junk drawer next to the spare batteries and the broken rubber bands. Richard wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had chosen a quiet life over his daughter's safety. And in my world, that was a debt no apology could settle. Diane was a ghost. The mandatory psychological evaluation had been the final airstrike. According to the legal updates from Rachel, Diane had gone into a full-scale collapse when the doctors started asking about her mother. The tyrant was now a patient. She was silent because her weapons had been confiscated. She was powerless because she was no longer the one telling the story. I went to the backyard and dragged the big rolling trash can to the edge of the driveway. I spent the afternoon clearing the perimeter. I went through Lily's closet and pulled out every lace dress, every itchy sweater, and every pair of patent leather shoes Diane had ever bought. I didn't donate them. I didn't want another child carrying that weight. I threw them into the black plastic bag and listened to the dull thud as they hit the bottom of the bin. Then came the bear. Button sat on the kitchen counter, its glass eyes staring at nothing. I had already removed the tile tracker, but the bear still felt wrong. It felt like a recording device, even without the wires. I didn't hesitate. I dropped it into a heavy-duty freezer bag, zipped it shut, and tossed it into the dumpster. I watched the lid slam shut. Thud. The snitch was gone. I drove to a local toy store that evening. No lace, no department store history. I bought a bear that was plain, soft, and smelled like nothing but clean cotton. Lily named him Cloud. He's soft, Mom, she said, squeezing the new toy as she sat on the rug in the living room. He doesn't have any hard parts inside. I watched her for a long time. She was drawing a picture of our house. She used a bright yellow crayon for the sun and a thick green one for the grass. There were no fences in her drawing, no holes in the paper where faces used to be. She looked up at me, her eyes clear, the shadow of the last 9 months finally lifting from her face. Mom? She asked. Yeah, baby. I'm glad you're not the sensitive one anymore. The words hit me harder than the gavel. They weren't an insult. They were an observation. For 7 years, she had watched me swallow my words. She had watched me shake while Diane called me unstable and fragile. She had seen me take the hits and call it family peace. But she had also seen me stand up in that courtroom. She had seen me draw the line in the dirt. I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. I was never sensitive, Lily, I whispered. I was just waiting for the right moment to stop being a target. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the new security monitor. 4 clear angles of the yard. The perimeter was secure, the locks were heavy, the phone was silent. They spent 34 years telling me I was overreacting. They used that word like a pair of handcuffs, a way to make me doubt my own eyes. But here was the truth. People who call you crazy for protecting yourself are usually the ones who benefit from you being defenseless. People who tell you not to react are the ones who are counting on your silence to keep their secrets safe. The campaign was over. The recon was done. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop to start the paperwork for Lily's school transfer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I looked at the drawing Lily had left on the table. A house with a solid roof and a sun that actually reached the ground. The war was won. The perimeter was safe. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a beginning. I reached for my coffee, my hand perfectly steady. The reconstruction had officially begun. The steam rose from my black coffee in a steady silver ribbon. I sat on the porch, my back against the cedar siding, watching the sun pull itself over the horizon. It's been a year since courtroom number 3. 365 days since a judge's gavel officially severed the cord. The permanent order of protection is just a stack of legal bond papers sitting in a file cabinet, but the piece it bought is carved into the very foundation of this house. I still have the dreams sometimes. I call them phantom ringtones. I'll wake up at 3 in the morning, my heart hammering against my ribs, certain that I heard Diane's voice coming through the baby monitor or the sharp, insistent chirp of a burner phone in the vents. My therapist calls it phantom pain. It's the same sensation a soldier feels in a limb that's been blown off, an itch in a hand that isn't there. My family of origin is gone. I don't have a mother to call when Lily gets a fever. I don't have a father to ask for advice on the lawn. For a long time, that silence felt like a failure. It felt like I'd burned my own bridge and was standing on the shore, shivering in the cold. But then I look at my blood pressure readings. I look at the cortisol levels in my blood work. For the first time in 34 years, the internal alarm system is silent. My home is no longer a sandbox for a narcissist's war games. My kitchen is no longer a minefield where a single wrong word could trigger a 3-month embargo of silence. We eat dinner, we laugh, and we go to bed without checking the perimeter for emotional snipers. The silence isn't a void anymore. It's a sanctuary. Sunday afternoon brought a familiar hum of a diesel engine. A dusty pickup truck pulled into the driveway, and Derek hopped out. He looked different than the man who had collapsed in my kitchen a year ago. He looked lighter. He was carrying Lucas, his 6-month-old son, propped against his hip like a shield. Derek had paid a high price for his defection. The day after the trial, Diane had called her lawyer and stripped him from the will. Every cent of the inheritance, the house, the legacy he'd been promised his whole life, gone. He'd been officially unpersoned. We sat on the porch steps, the wood still warm from the afternoon sun, and cracked open 2 cold beers. The pissish of the can's opening was the only sound for a long minute. We watched Lily in the backyard, showing Lucas how to pick dandelions. I lost the house, Derek said, taking a long pull of his lager. He looked out at the trees, his eyes clear and steady. I lost the $400,000 safety net. Mom sent me a letter through a third party saying I was dead to her. It was written in that perfect cursive she uses for Christmas cards. I looked at him, seeing the ghost of the boy who used to hide in his room while Diane screamed at me. Do you regret it? Regret it? Derek let out a short, dry laugh. He looked down at Lucas, who was reaching for the condensation on the beer can. I bought his freedom, Sienna. I traded an old house full of secrets for a son who will never have to wonder if my love has strings attached. I traded a check for his soul. It's the best deal I ever made. We are the cycle breakers. It's a gritty, exhausting title. It means we are the ones who chose to take the hit so the poison stops with us. We took the trauma of 3 generations and buried it in a courtroom in the suburbs. We are the firewall. I looked at Lily. She's 8 now. She was running through the grass, her knees stained with mud and her hair a tangled mess of wind and play. Diane would have had a stroke seeing her like that. Diane would have spent an hour scrubbing her skin and telling her that little ladies don't get dirty. But Lily didn't look at me for permission to exist. When she didn't want to play a game, she stood her ground. She crossed her arms, looked Matt right in the eye, and said, "No, I don't want to do that." Matt didn't yell. He didn't call her sensitive or dramatic. He just nodded and asked what she'd rather do instead. That is the legacy I'm leaving her. Not a trust fund. Not a collection of fake pearls and hollow traditions. I'm giving her the right to her own voice. I'm teaching her that no is a complete sentence. I'm ensuring that she will never have to spend 30 years wondering if she's overreacting for wanting to be safe. That autonomy is worth more than any $42,000 check Diane ever dangled over my head. The wind blew through the oaks, a soft, cooling breeze that didn't carry the scent of heavy floral perfume. The perimeter was secure. The war was over. I finished my coffee. The cup was empty, but my heart was full. I stood up, stretched my back, and walked down into the grass to join my family. The reconstruction was complete. The future was finally ours. Thanks for standing with me in this after-action review. I'll see you at the next perimeter.